So, Andrew, I have to start with you because you have a badge of honor. You were called out by Donald Trump on Truth Social. I'm a little confused by this Colorado case. Walk us through how Trump's legal team is looking at this at this point.
Well, this is a novel issue because we haven't had this situation with a former president now seeking to be elected who has, by all accounts, colloquially engaged in insurrection. We all sort of watched it and have seen the evidence of that. But there are some very complicated legal issues. And as you noted, Jen, there are legal scholars on both sides. I would note that there are very prominent conservative scholars and judges who have said that it does apply to former President Trump. Obviously, I think this will end up at the Supreme Court to decide the issue. I would agree with your last guest that politically it may be better for the country if people can vote on this and have it not decided on the basis of a provision in the Constitution, but we can't avoid that any more than if it turned out that someone who was 34 years old was running for president, they would be disqualified. They're not qualified under the Constitution. So this really does have to be decided by the Supreme Court about whether he is actually qualified to be the next president of the United States.
So, Neil, first of all, welcome back from Burning Man. We're so relieved you're safe. But there's few people who know as much about the Supreme Court than you, know more than you. If this goes to the Supreme Court, which Andrew was saying, I think you agree that that's where it will land. What is the timeline? Could this happen before the New Hampshire primary, or is that too fast?
So first of all, I think that Trump's attacks on Andrew are totally wrong, and it's directed at the wrong target. What Trump is really attacking is the 14th Amendment itself, and in particular Section 3, which bars insurrectionists from holding office, of which he certainly looks like one. Representative Bingham wrote that. This is not the first time that Donald Trump has attacked the 14th Amendment. That's really what the attacks are. Now, with respect to the Supreme Court, I think absolutely this can be decided well before February. It's already percolating in the Colorado courts. I think in Colorado it'll have a good chance of success because of this legal concept called standing, which in Colorado allows voters, including the 6 Republican and independent voters who brought this lawsuit here, to basically have standing. That's different than like Florida, where a case was thrown out. So I think it will succeed in Colorado, or at least succeed and go up through the Colorado courts, and then it'll reach the U.S. Supreme Court and can be expedited in time for a decision by February.
Ooh, so much in the Supreme Court. I just want to move on to the Georgia case here, because Meadows' request to move his criminal case to a federal court was denied. He's now appealing. If you're on Trump's legal team, how are you, Andrew, I'm going to start with you. How are you interpreting this? Are you going to move forward, or are you stopping the presses?
Well, I could see him wanting to move forward because it's a way of having some potential delay. But, you know, there is a big difference between Mr. Meadows and Mr. Trump. Meadows testified, and he has the burden, so he went forward and testified to try and carry his burden. It'll remain to be seen whether a court of appeals disagrees with the district judge, but I can't imagine that Donald Trump is going to testify. And if he doesn't testify, it's hard to see how he is going to meet his burden. Remember, it's the movement's burden here. So Donald Trump is in a very different situation because of that. And then obviously the merits of the district judge decision is resoundingly against removal in the case of the former president. If you're not going to remove as to Mark Meadows, you certainly aren't going to remove as to the former president.
So if Trump does this, does he have to testify, or is that part of the deal?
So I agree with my law partner, Andrew, that basically, he does, as a practical matter, have to testify. And that's particularly so because Judge Jones's 49-page opinion eviscerates the claim of removal for Mark Meadows, and by definition really does it for Trump as well. You've got to be performing a federal function. And what the judge says is the executive branch is cut out of federal functions when it comes to presidential elections, because the last thing you want is for an incumbent president to use his power hours in office to try and keep himself in office, and that's what the founders feared.
So the other big development this week was that a grand jury report was released that disclosed the names of people recommended for charges, but ultimately not charged. So for those of us who are just learning a lot about the law and the legal process, how common is that?
So grand juries sometimes do recommend more people for indictment than the prosecutor ultimately indicts, and that's because grand juries are only privy to one side of the case. Sometimes prosecutors have more, and also there are strategic reasons. So here, for example, I think Fani Willis looked at the 32 people, including like Senator Lindsey Graham, 2 other former U.S. senators who were recommended for indictment, and said, I don't need to do that. I've got this airtight case against 19 people, including Donald Trump. And by the way, if I do these U.S. senators, those might be removed because those aren't people in the executive branch. You could move those cases to federal court. That could gum up everything. So I think she made a very smart strategic decision.
So, Andrew, moving into the federal election interference case, the D.C. grand jury met again this week. What additional lines of investigation or what could be going on behind the scenes with Jack Smith right now?
So I think there are a lot of lines of investigation. So we know that the existing indictment names 6 unindicted co-conspirators, but there's very detailed allegations in that indictment. So there could be additional fact-finding as to those 6 people, such as Rudy Giuliani, John Eastman, Jeff Clark, Sidney Powell, a bunch of others. In addition, we've heard about an ongoing investigation into financial fraud. In other words, that a PAC is raising money based on false pretenses. I sort of really like that one because I can really see that as a clean case, and it also can lead to pretrial forfeiture. Meaning that if that case is brought against the PAC and members of the PAC, the government can seek to forfeit and essentially freeze money now that is being used for improper purposes. So there's at least 2 potential things that could be going on in the D.C. grand jury.
Before we let you go, do you think there's more indictments coming? Are we watching for that?
I do. And part of the reason is Donald Trump's MO is obstruction of justice. It's interference. It's using one lawyer for a bunch of co-defendants to try and get them all sing on the same page. And we've seen this already in the Mar-a-Lago stolen documents investigation, in which the IT guy, Yusel Tavares, has basically flipped his story. He's now cooperating. And there's a massive obstruction investigation going on there. And I suspect something similar might happen with respect to January 6th as well.